No one can pinpoint the exact moment when the Comanche first mastered the horse, but the change it brought to their people was nothing short of revolutionary. From their modest beginnings in the foothills of the Rockies, the Comanches' relationship with horses transformed them into one of the most formidable powers of the Great Plains. This profound adaptation allowed them to assert dominance over smaller tribes, seizing control of the coveted buffalo-rich plains. In doing so, they carved out an empire known as Comancheria, an expansive territory spanning nearly 250,000 square miles, covering what we now call Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Kansas, and Colorado. But this was more than just their homeland. The Comanches' strength extended well beyond these borders. Their unmatched raiding prowess took them as far north as Nebraska and Wyoming and south into the depths of Mexico. S.C. Gwynn captured this reality vividly in Empire of the Summer Moon. A Spanish soldier stationed in San Antonio might live in constant fear of a Comanche warrior enjoying his fire in what is now modern-day Oklahoma City. Such was their range, skill, and sheer audacity. The Comanche were not merely feared, they were respected and acknowledged as the lords of the southern plains. Their power was so significant that it shaped national policies. The Mexican government, recognizing the challenge of containing Comanche raids, invited American settlers to Texas, hoping they might serve as a buffer against these fearsome horsemen. This decision, though practical in intent, set the stage for future conflicts as settlers found themselves drawn into a centuries-old struggle for control over the plains. As history often repeats itself, the newly arrived settlers from the east, much like the Spanish and Mexicans before them, quickly found themselves in conflict with the Comanche. These clashes were inevitable as wave after wave of settlers encroached on Comanche territory, attempting to carve out a meager existence from the unforgiving land. Yet, in those formative years of Texas's history, the balance of power was unmistakably in favor of the Comanche. Even though the Texans had declared their independence from Mexico and established their republic, the reality was far from the triumph they celebrated. Much of this new republic remained under the de facto control of the Comanche, whose dominance of the southern plains was unchallenged by any military force in the region. The settlers were not just facing a powerful adversary, they were encountering a people whose existence and survival were deeply rooted in this land for generations. Efforts at peace proved fleeting, marred by mistrust and betrayals on both sides. Negotiations collapsed under the weight of misunderstandings and cultural divides, giving way to an era of brutal violence. Raids and retaliatory strikes swept across the frontier, each act more devastating than the last. Entire bloodlines were extinguished as the cycle of vengeance spiraled out of control, leaving behind scars that would linger for generations. When Texas joined the Union in 1845, federal troops were deployed to the region, constructing a line of forts in an effort to provide minimal protection for settlers encroaching on the borders of Comancheria. However, these troops, predominantly infantry, were woefully ill-suited for the task of confronting the highly mobile and skilled Comanche horsemen. Even the dragoons, the mounted predecessors to modern cavalry, struggled to match the speed and precision of the Comanche. Armed with swords and cumbersome musketoons, these troops were no match for warriors who could unleash a flurry of arrows while galloping at full speed. The ineffectiveness of federal forces was compounded by passive and restrictive policies. Soldiers were prohibited from engaging hostiles unless directly attacked or provided with indisputable evidence of criminal acts, a near impossible standard in the chaos of frontier life. Worse still, they were forbidden from pursuing raids into Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, a regulation aimed at protecting tribes such as the Cherokee and honoring tentative treaties with certain Comanche bands. However, this limitation created an unintended loophole. Comanche warriors realized they could raid Texas settlements with little risk of retaliation, retreating across the Red River to safety. The situation worsened in late 1857 when the dragoons of the 2nd U.S. Cavalry were redeployed to Utah to confront the Mormon uprising. This left the frontier virtually unguarded, and the absence of federal protection emboldened the Comanche to increase their raids. Rumors began circulating of another large-scale attack, reminiscent of the infamous 1840 raid led by the legendary Comanche leader Buffalo Hump, during which his warriors swept down to the Gulf of Mexico, leaving destruction in their wake. For the settlers, this was a time of fear and uncertainty. For the Comanche, it was another chapter in their ongoing resistance against encroachment on their lands, a demonstration of their mastery of the plains and their ability to exploit the vulnerabilities of those who sought to subjugate them. Faced with the escalating threat of Comanche raids and a frontier in chaos, Texas Governor Hardin Runnels concluded that the only solution was to reassemble the Texas Rangers. This force, known for its rugged independence and effectiveness in frontier warfare, had been largely disbanded after the Mexican-American War, as peace and financial constraints made their upkeep seem unnecessary. However, the pattern of disbanding and reforming the Rangers was far from new. Over the preceding decade, they had been temporarily called to action during crises in 1850, 1852, 1855, and 1857, each time operating with limited state funding before being sent home. The Rangers were Texas's answer to a volatile frontier, less bound by the bureaucracy of the U.S. Army and more attuned to the challenges of the southern plains. Yet their temporary status reflected the precarious balance between financial cost and the desperate need for protection. To lead this newly reassembled force, Governor Hardin Runnels selected none other than the legendary John Salmon Rip Ford. At first glance, Ford might have seemed an unconventional choice. By the late 1850s, he was in his early 40s, spending much of his time as a newspaper editor and Sunday school teacher. Most evenings, he was more likely to be found studying his Bible than strategizing for military campaigns. Yet beneath this unassuming exterior lay a man forged in the fires of frontier conflict. Ford had earned his reputation as an Indian fighter and seasoned ranger under the renowned Captain John Coffee Jack Hayes, one of the most famous Texas Ranger leaders of the era. During these early years, Ford endured grueling battles, losing a finger in combat with the Comanche and surviving a poison arrow wound, a painful reminder of the harsh realities of frontier warfare that lingered with him for years. His military service extended beyond the frontier. During the Mexican-American War, Ford rode with the mounted rifles, performing dangerous tasks that required both courage and precision. It was during this period that he earned his now iconic nickname. Tasked with delivering death notices to the families of fallen soldiers, Ford signed each letter with the solemn phrase, "Rest in peace." Over time, his fellow Rangers shortened this to R.I.P., and the name Ol' Rip became synonymous with his determined, unyielding character. Ford's selection as commander reflected more than just his combat experience. It symbolized the Texan reliance on leaders who embodied the rugged individualism and resilience necessary to survive and protect in the face of relentless challenges on the frontier. Despite his quiet demeanor and scholarly habits, Ford was exactly the kind of leader who could galvanize the Rangers for the difficult campaign ahead. In 1858, John Salmon Rip Ford was tasked with assembling a regiment of Texas Rangers for a bold and controversial mission. The plan was to launch a preemptive strike deep into Indian territory, with the aim of catching the Comanche unprepared and delivering a decisive blow. This campaign was unprecedented, both in its scope and its defiance of federal authority. Governor Hardin Runnels left no room for ambiguity in his orders. He stressed the importance of swift and decisive action, instructing Ford to follow any trail and all trails of hostile or suspected hostile Indians you may discover, and if possible, overtake and chastise them if unfriendly. These instructions not only authorized aggressive action, but also gave Ford free rein to operate beyond conventional limits. Runnels made it clear that Ford and his Rangers were to tolerate no interference, whether from the U.S., Army, or federal Indian agents, even if it meant crossing the Red River into lands where they had no legal jurisdiction. This directive effectively ignored federal policies designed to maintain peace with certain indigenous tribes and avoid conflict in Indian territory. The mission's open defiance of these regulations reflected Texas's growing frustration with federal inaction and their willingness to take matters into their own hands. With his orders clear, John Salmon Rip Ford began his journey north, recruiting volunteers along the way until his force swelled to just over 100 Texas Rangers. Their first stop was near Fort Belknap, where they established Camp Runnels, named in honor of the governor. From this base, Ford began the meticulous process of organizing and drilling his men, many of whom were seasoned fighters with prior experience against both indigenous warriors and Mexican troops. Each ranger was armed with a long rifle and at least 2 Colt revolvers, tools that represented a significant leap forward in frontier warfare. Ford attempted to secure a shipment of the newer Navy Colt revolvers, but his request was denied by Major General David Twiggs, who commanded the Department of Texas. Twiggs refused to release the weapons unless Ford placed his Rangers under federal oversight, a demand Ford vehemently rejected. Given the Rangers' plans to bypass federal policy, openly confront the Comanche, and invade Indian territory without legal jurisdiction, federal supervision was the last thing they wanted. Undeterred, Ford made do with the slightly older revolvers already in their possession. Even with older weaponry, the Rangers held a crucial advantage. Ford proudly boasted that his men could collectively fire up to 1,500 rounds without reloading, a stark contrast to earlier years, when single-shot muskets and pistols left settlers and soldiers at a distinct disadvantage. Back then, a skilled teenage Comanche warrior could fire 20 precise arrows in the time it took a ranger to reload a single musket. This disparity had long cemented the Comanche's reputation as the most formidable mounted warriors on the plains. However, with Sam Colt's equalizers, the balance shifted dramatically. These revolvers could be fired with deadly accuracy from horseback, allowing the Rangers to meet the Comanche on equal footing in mounted combat, a pivotal factor in the campaigns to come. As the Rangers prepared for their campaign, a young Sul Ross, later to become a governor of Texas, took on a critical task. At just 19 years old, Ross traveled to the nearby Brazos Indian Agency to recruit indigenous allies. The bulk of these warriors came from the Tonkawa, a tribe deeply entwined with Texas history. It is believed that the Tonkawa settled in the region even before the arrival of the Comanche, establishing themselves in the central part of what is now Texas, near the area surrounding Round Rock. During the Texan Revolution against Mexico, the Tonkawa aligned themselves with the Texan settlers, forging a relationship that, for the most part, remained amicable. However, by the early 1850s, the Tonkawa, along with other smaller tribes such as the Caddo, Anadarko, and Waco, were forcibly relocated to the Brazos River Reservation, situated about 12 miles south of Fort Belknap. Despite this upheaval, the Tonkawa's reputation as fierce warriors endured. Like the settlers, they had suffered under repeated raids by the Comanche, giving them a personal stake in the fight. Joining the Rangers offered them an opportunity not only to secure their safety, but to exact revenge. The Tonkawa contingent was led by their indomitable chief Placido, known among his people as Hashukana, or Can't Kill Him. At 70 years old, Placido embodied resilience and strength, having weathered decades of intertribal conflict. His life symbolized the complex and often fraught relationships among the indigenous tribes. Ironically, his mother had once been a Comanche captive. This connection underscored the long history of enmity between the Tonkawa and the Comanche, a rivalry that was deeply rooted in the struggles for survival and dominance on the southern plains. The Tonkawa were joined by warriors from other tribes including the Waco, Caddo, Anadarko, and even a few Shawnee, forming a diverse force of 113 reservation warriors. Among them was Kichi, a specially recruited scout who had previously lived among the Comanche. Kichi's knowledge of their customs and tactics would prove invaluable during the campaign. This coalition of indigenous allies represented a complex intersection of old rivalries, alliances, and the shared struggle to navigate a rapidly changing world. Captain John Rip Ford oversaw the final preparations for his campaign. 2 light wagons were loaded with powder and essential supplies, but notably lacked significant provisions of food. This campaign, in Ford's mind, was to be conducted in the old way, echoing the tactics used years earlier under the leadership of the legendary John Coffey Jack Hayes. The Rangers would rely on speed, resilience, and resourcefulness, foregoing traditional logistical support. Both the Rangers and their indigenous allies, including the Tonkawa, were prepared for the hardships ahead. They would hunt for sustenance as they traveled, depending on the land to provide what they needed. Their horses, like those of the Comanche, would graze on wild grass, adapting to the unpredictable conditions of the plains. This minimalist approach, though grueling, allowed the force to remain highly mobile, an essential advantage in confronting the Comanche, whose mastery of mounted warfare was unrivaled. This strategy symbolized the harsh realities of frontier warfare, where survival depended on endurance, ingenuity, and a willingness to embrace privation. It also reflected the deep understanding both the Rangers and their indigenous allies had of the land they traversed, an understanding born from generations of living, fighting, and surviving on the southern plains. On April 22, 1858, Captain John Rip Ford led his column of over 200 men north, crossing the Red River into Indian Territory despite clear federal policies prohibiting such actions. When later questioned about his bold defiance, Ford dismissed the criticism with a blunt reply, "My mission was to find Indians, not learn geography." This unyielding determination set the tone for what would become a controversial and significant campaign. Among Ford's force were the Tonkawa, a tribe whose role in the campaign often sparks curiosity and at times misunderstanding. The Tonkawa's history has been overshadowed by exaggerated claims of their ritual cannibalism, often used as a tool for sensationalism or as justification for atrocities committed against them. To clarify, the Tonkawa did practice ritualistic cannibalism on occasion, but this was far from the caricature often depicted. It was a deeply symbolic act, meant to absorb the strength or spirit of a defeated enemy, rather than a practice driven by hunger or necessity. While such rituals may seem alien or unsettling today, they were no less controversial in their time, even among other tribes like the Comanche. This element of their culture also served to intimidate their enemies, creating an aura of fear that added to their reputation as fierce warriors. However, it is critical to differentiate these ritual practices from the baseless accusations that were historically amplified to justify genocide, especially against neighboring tribes like the Karankawa. Furthermore, contrary to widespread myths, the Tonkawa are not extinct. Today, their legacy continues, with several hundred enrolled members living and thriving in Oklahoma, preserving their culture and history despite centuries of hardship. After crossing the Red River, the Tonkawa, serving as scouts for the Rangers, took the lead, ranging far ahead of the main force in search of signs of Comanche activity. Their skills in tracking proved invaluable, and after nearly 2 weeks on the trail, they reported sighting a series of Comanche camps along the Canadian River. On May 11, 1858, the Rangers and their Tonkawa allies spotted a few Comanche hunters in the distance, pursuing buffalo. Recognizing this as a sign that a larger group was nearby, Captain John Rip Ford ordered his men to establish a cold camp to avoid detection, forbidding fires or noise that might alert the Comanche. That night, the Tonkawa scouts ventured deeper into the area, gathering critical intelligence. The scouts discovered a small Comanche village of fewer than a dozen lodges situated along Little Robe Creek. Ford saw this as an opportunity to strike, particularly after receiving reports of a larger settlement further to the north. On the morning of May 12th, just before first light, the Tonkawa wrapped cloth around their heads to distinguish themselves from their enemies, a precaution to avoid confusion in the chaos of battle. With Ford's approval, they launched a sudden and devastating assault on the unsuspecting village. The attack was swift and brutal. The Tonkawa overran the camp, catching the Comanche completely off guard. Nearly everyone in the village, including women and men, was killed, and a few survivors were taken captive. Ford later justified the deaths of women, controversially stating that it was difficult to distinguish warriors from non-combatants in the heat of battle. Encouraged by this success, the column pressed on to the larger Comanche village reported nearby. This time, however, the Comanche were prepared. The defenders rallied under the leadership of the legendary Chief Iron Jacket, whose name derives from the Spanish mail armor he wore into battle, a relic believed to have been acquired during earlier interactions with Spanish settlers. Iron Jacket, known among his people for his courage and skill, was also regarded as a powerful medicine man. Legends claimed he could deflect bullets with his breath, perhaps inspired by the armor's ability to repel musket balls and arrows. To the Mexicans and Texans, the legendary Comanche leader was known as Iron Jacket, a name derived from the old Spanish coat of mail he wore into battle, a rare relic believed to have been acquired during early encounters with Spanish settlers. This armor, a combination of practicality and symbolism, added to the mystique of the warrior. Though details about Iron Jacket's life are sparse, it is believed he was around 60 years old at the time of this battle. A seasoned war chief with countless raids and victories to his name. He was also regarded as a medicine man, with some claiming he could blow bullets away with his breath, likely a reference to the armor's ability to deflect arrows and poorly charged musket balls. Iron Jacket's presence on the battlefield was both commanding and defiant. Alone and undaunted, he rode out in full view of the Rangers and their Tonkawa allies, taunting them and challenging their courage with an invitation to individual combat. His boldness underscored the Comanche's warrior ethos and their belief in personal bravery as a cornerstone of leadership. However, this moment of defiance was met with force. Captain John Rip Ford ordered his men to fire a volley of shots. Some bullets struck true, unseating the old chief from his horse. Yet, true to his reputation, Iron Jacket rose to his feet, undeterred, and notched another arrow. Another volley rang out, and this time a bullet found its mark, ending the life of one of the Comanche's most storied leaders. The death of Iron Jacket was a significant blow to the Comanche. His fall momentarily shattered their morale, underscoring the profound role that charismatic leaders played in the unity and strength of their people. His bravery and legendary stature, however, would endure in the memory of his people, serving as a reminder of their resilience and their unyielding spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. As the battle raged on, many Comanche fighters were forced to fall back, leaving only a handful of steadfast warriors to hold their ground. These brave individuals faced overwhelming odds, standing firm to buy time for their women and children to escape. True to their tradition of protecting their families at all costs, a small group of warriors made a stand on the banks of Little Robe Creek, using their courage and skill to slow the advance of the Texas Rangers. Their sacrifice was not in vain. Thanks to their efforts, a few family members managed to flee to safety. However, the cost was immense. Each of these defenders was eventually overwhelmed and killed by the relentless Rangers and their Brazos Reservation allies, including the Tonkawa. The courage of these Comanche warriors highlighted their enduring resilience, even in the face of near-certain death. The battle then escalated into a chaotic and grueling running fight, stretching miles across the open prairie. Mounted Rangers pursued the remaining survivors, using their superior firepower and mobility to press their advantage. Sergeant Bob Cotter, a participant in the battle, later remarked on the leadership of Captain John Rip Ford, describing him as being everywhere, directing and controlling the movements of his men. As the hours wore on, exhaustion began to take its toll. After 6 continuous hours of intense combat, Ford recognized the limits of his force. Powder and ammunition were running dangerously low, and the horses were nearing the point of collapse. Realizing the need to regroup, Ford gave the order to withdraw to the conquered Comanche village. The Rangers, though victorious, were left physically and emotionally drained, a stark reminder of the brutal toll of frontier warfare. As the Texas Rangers and their Tonkawa allies paused to rest, the battle was far from over. In the distance, several hundred additional Comanche warriors appeared, led by Pete Nakona, the son of the fallen Iron Jacket, and the Kona, who would later be remembered as the father of Quanah Parker, one of the most legendary Comanche leaders. What unfolded next was a rare and extraordinary moment, one that few white men had ever witnessed. For nearly an hour, the Comanche and Tonkawa warriors engaged in individual hand-to-hand combat, meeting in the open as adversaries locked in a duel of skill and bravery. To Captain John Rip Ford, the scene was reminiscent of medieval jousts and knightly tournaments. Reflecting on the spectacle, Ford later remarked, "The mind of the spectator was carried back to the days of chivalry, the jousts and tournaments of knights. The whole performance was a novel show to a civilized man." Despite their courage, the Tonkawa began to falter under the relentless strength of the Comanche fighters. Recognizing this, Ford ordered the Tonkawa to advance en masse in an attempt to bluff the Comanche into descending from the hills. However, Pete Nakona and the Kona refused to take the bait. Impatient, Ford commanded his Rangers to move forward at a trot. As they closed the distance, the order was given to charge, reigniting the fierce combat. Although the Comanche outnumbered their attackers by at least 2-1, they were outmatched by the Rangers' leadership and the devastating firepower of their six-shooters. The sudden loss of Iron Jacket, compounded by the shock of being attacked in their own territory, further disrupted the Comanche's cohesion. Nevertheless, Pete Nakona, the Kona, and the other leaders managed to organize a disciplined retreat, engaging in delaying actions to protect the women and children fleeing to safety. The battle stretched for miles across the plains, with Rangers and Tonkawa pursuing the retreating Comanche. After hours of fighting, Ford, concerned about the exhaustion of his men and horses, finally ordered a halt and called for the force to regroup. The toll of the day's action was staggering. The Comanche suffered an estimated 75 dead, and the Rangers captured 18 women and children, along with 300 horses. Miraculously, the Rangers lost only one man, while a Waco warrior fighting alongside them was also killed, both falling to lances during the fight. Even as the Rangers consolidated their victory, the fight was far from over. Ford received intelligence from a captive that an even larger Comanche village, led by the renowned Chief Buffalo Hump, lay further down the river. This revelation hinted at the challenges still to come in the ongoing struggle for control of the southern plains. As was customary in campaigns of this kind, the remaining Comanche villages were razed, their remnants left in ashes. On the morning of May 13th, the Texas Rangers and their Tonkawa allies began their journey south, carrying the weight of their victories and the destruction they had wrought back to Camp Runnels. By May 21st, they had returned, and Captain John "Rip" Ford wasted no time in documenting the campaign's outcomes. In his after-action report, Ford highlighted the effectiveness of their approach, emphasizing that future efforts against hostile forces should replicate their laborious, vigilant, and relentless methods. He concluded with a confident assertion: the Comanche can be followed, overtaken, and beaten, provided the pursuers are willing to endure hardships. Ford's success ignited debates across Texas. The question loomed: who was better equipped to defend the frontier, the Rangers or the U.S. Army? In the months that followed, Sam Houston himself weighed in, proclaiming that federal troops were unnecessary. "Give us 1,000 Rangers, and we will be responsible for the defense of the frontier." Yet, as so often happens in wartime, financial realities dampened ambitions. Governor Hardin Runnels, facing mounting costs, declared victory and disbanded the Rangers once more, halting Ford's plans for future expeditions. The Comanche, however, were far from subdued. Their raids intensified in the years to come, particularly as Texas men of fighting age left to join the Civil War. It wasn't until 1874, during the Battle of Palo Duro Canyon, that the Comanche resistance was finally broken. Even then, it took a devastating act to achieve this. Over 1,000 horses were slaughtered, and hundreds of lodges, the heart of Comanche life, were destroyed. The Tonkawa, ever the allies of the Texan forces, played a role in this campaign, yet their loyalty was met with betrayal. Like many other tribes, they were forcibly removed from their lands and exiled to Indian territory alongside the very people they had helped to fight. By this time, figures like Peter Nakona and Buffalo Hump had passed into history, and Rip Ford, now retired, settled into a quieter life in Brownsville, Texas, where he served as mayor. While far removed from the chaos of frontier battles, it's likely that Ford found the complexities of small-town politics to be a different kind of war, a subtler, but no less demanding, challenge. This chapter of history underscores the cyclical nature of conflict on the frontier. While the campaigns of the Rangers were heralded as victories in Texas, they were part of a larger narrative of displacement, destruction, and resilience. For the Comanche and their allies, these battles were not just about survival, but about defending a way of life against relentless encroachment. And so concludes the story of the Battle of Little Robe Creek, also known as the Battle of Antelope Hills. This chapter in history remains a stark reminder of the turbulent clash of cultures on the southern plains, a collision of expansion, resistance, and survival. For the Comanche, it was not merely a battle, but part of an enduring fight to defend their way of life, their families, and their homeland against relentless encroachment. This battle marked a moment of triumph for the Texas Rangers, but it also symbolized the profound cost of these conflicts: lives lost, communities uprooted, and the fragile balance of the plains irrevocably altered. It is a story of bravery on all sides, from the defiant Comanche warriors like Iron Jacket, who stood firm against overwhelming odds, to the determined Tonkawa allies, whose complicated history as scouts and warriors often left them caught between survival and betrayal. The events of Antelope Hills are not merely tales of the past. They are threads woven into the fabric of today's Native American resilience and identity. They remind us of the enduring strength of the Comanche people and their allies, who continue to honor their heritage and rebuild their communities against the tide of history. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the rich and complex history of the Southern Plains. I hope this story has offered insights, sparked curiosity, and deepened your appreciation for the legacies that still shape our world today.